I'll be direct. It's pretty bad. But let me briefly set the stage for you. In 1966, the Major League Baseball Players Association hired Marvin Miller to be its executive director. Miller started by taking a look at the contracts players had, and the one with Topps immediately stuck out. In that era, Topps would pay every minor league player just $5 to lock them into an individual contract for 5 years. If they appeared on a card or made the Major League roster for at least 31 days, each player, from Mickey Mantle to Claude Raymond, would get a flat fee of $125 a season. No royalties. Miller met with Topps president Joel Shorin, but he refused to change the terms of the contracts. By early 1967, Miller went to his players, explained the situation, and encouraged them to refuse to sign the annual contracts with Topps, and not pose for any pictures with Topps photographers. By August 1967, Topps was having trouble getting players to pose, and by spring training 1968, no players would take pictures with Topps. Apparently, Topps took no pictures of major leaguers at all during the 1968 season. By November 1968, Topps caved and negotiated with Marvin Miller. They now agreed to pay $250 per player as well as a royalty to the union of 8% of revenue up to $4 million, and a 10% royalty over that. Although Topps had a deal with the Players Association, they had a huge problem on their hands. Within just a few months, they were expected to release Series 1 of the 1969 set, and they were facing a number of challenges. They had no player photos from 1968 at all. There were 4 new expansion teams, the Royals, Seattle Pilots, Expos, and Padres, with no way to get pictures of players in those uniforms. The Oakland A's had moved from Kansas City in 1968, and Topps had no images of the team in their new uniforms. And the Astros were in a dispute with Topps. The team would not allow the use of their name and logo on cards without compensation. Topps referred to the team only as Houston. Even with all those constraints, Topps did release Series 1 of the 1969 set in the spring. To figure out just how bad it was, I went through all the base player cards, 89 of the first 109 cards. Topps' strategy for creating the 1969 set was obvious. They had no choice but to reuse their older images. I'm sure you're all familiar with the worst examples of this. Superstar players like Hank Aaron, Ernie Banks, Louis Aparicio, and Joe Morgan have the exact same pictures, just recycled from their 1968 cards. But Topps did this with many other players. 17 of those 89 cards had exact photos lifted from previous sets. The worst example here is number 69, Steve Hamilton. This image was from his 1964 card, with a picture taken in 1963, 6 years before the 1969 set came out. Here are some others. These pictures were all taken from 1965 or 1966 photo sessions that appeared on 1967 cards. For the most part, though, Topps would use alternate photos from sessions in previous years. We know that Topps photographers would take multiple pictures of players, such as batting, fielding, and pitching poses, along with a portrait with a cap and one without. So for 1969, Topps went through their archives and used these alternate poses in over half of Series 1. Here's some examples. Nelson Briles is pictured on his 1968 card from spring training in 1967. For 1969, Topps used an alternative pitching pose. The number 21, Jose Santiago, is similar. 1969 before pose, and the 1968 card shows the after, the release pose. Topps did the same thing with batters. 1968 before and 1969 after on this 1967 photo shoot from Yankee Stadium for Jay Johnstone. Much to the bane of kids and collectors, capless and airbrush shots are also very common in Series 1, making up more than half of the 89 player cards. Topps had to do this because there were so many players that changed teams between 1967 and 1969, particularly those from the 4 expansion teams. All of those players got either capless or airbrushed images. For the Oakland A's, Topps' solution was either a capless Lou Krause and Danny Cater, or airbrushing the Kansas City logo off Dave Duncan and Rick Monday's cards. For the 4 Astros cards, Topps used both capless and airbrushed photos here too. The quality of the airbrushing produced several card variations in Series 1. With Paul Popovich, there are 3 different cards. The first is where the Cubs logo is still visible. The second, where it's mostly covered. and a third where there's a black blob over the logo. Ron Peronowski's card has one version with the LA logo visible, and the other where it's not. Another compromise Topps made was with the team cards. Because of the player boycott, they only had 13 team cards out of 20 teams in the 1968 set. In 1969, they didn't include any team picture cards at all. Topps started using team cards in 1956, and 1969 was the only set of the vintage era after 1956 without them. Topps wasn't able to take any new, current photos of players until spring training 1969. This meant that Series 2 through 4 of the 1969 set were just as bad as Series 1, with all the airbrushing, capless, and reused photos. One notable exception is the Reggie Jackson rookie card. This picture was taken in 1968, but apparently Topps purchased this photo directly from the photographer, as they did with several others in the set, according to Keith Olbermann. But by Series 5, kids could finally see the new uniforms of the expansion teams, the correct Oakland hats, and the new Washington Senators uniforms. Topps also was able to work out its dispute with the Astros. Although the team was still identified as Houston on the cards, Topps began showing the team logo on hats and uniform jerseys. But I don't want to give the impression that the last 3 series of 69 Topps were perfect. Topps still continued to use many older, outdated pictures along with a generous number of capless and airbrushed images. One famous example collectors have pointed out is this Al Jackson card from the 7th series, which shows him wearing a uniform with a World's Fair patch only worn by the Mets in 1964 or 1965. It was the same for the Kevin Collins card in the 2nd series. What do you think of 1969 Topps? Should we give Topps credit for at least putting out a set when they had so many challenges? Or do you think it's one of the worst sets they ever released? Leave a comment below. Thanks for watching.